Imagine you're cruising at 35,000 feet. The cabin's pitch dark, passengers are fast asleep, and you're just surrounded by the seemingly endless expanse of the Atlantic Ocean at night. This is the exact setting of one of aviation's darkest, most terrifying mysteries. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking the anatomy of a disaster that literally changed the aviation industry forever, the tragic loss of Air France Flight 447. We're going to look closely at the precise chain of events, the mechanical failures, and frankly, the human errors that brought down a modern marvel of engineering.
So it begs this chilling question that baffled the entire world back in 2009. How does a massive, highly automated, state-of-the-art Airbus just vanish? I mean, the A330 was, and honestly still is, considered one of the safest aircraft in the skies. How does it disappear over the ocean with 228 people on board without a single distress call? No mayday, no warning to air traffic control, just total silence. Well, let's trace the flight path and figure out exactly what happened on that desolate stretch of the Atlantic.
Part 1. The impossible disappearance. Let's dive in and establish exactly where and when this nightmare actually began. Okay, picture this. The date is May 31st, 2009. It's around 10 p.m., and a gleaming 4-year-old Airbus A330 is accelerating down the runway at Rio de Janeiro's Aviation International Airport, bound for Paris. On board, 228 people from 33 different countries. And at first, everything is completely routine. The plane climbs to 35,000 feet, but as the hours tick by, the aircraft heads directly toward the Intertropical Convergence Zone, or the ITCZ. Now, this is a notorious region near the equator where winds from the northern and southern hemispheres just violently collide, producing some of the most unpredictable thunderstorms on planet Earth. Adding to the danger here, this specific stretch of their flight path was a radar black hole. They were out of range of Brazilian radar, and they weren't yet within range of Senegal. They were entirely, completely on their own.
Now, the sheer force of nature definitely sets the stage, but it was a very specific mechanical failure that served as the catalyst. Part 2. The technical trigger.
To really understand what went wrong, you've got to understand this incredibly vital piece of hardware called pitot tubes. Basically, these are small, forward-facing sensors mounted right on the exterior of the aircraft's nose. Their job is simple but absolutely critical. They measure the incoming air pressure and feed that data to the flight computers so the pilots know exactly how fast the plane is moving. But on this specific night, surrounded by a massive storm, extremely fine ice crystals began to bombard the aircraft. The internal heaters on those pitot tubes just couldn't keep up, and the sensors completely iced over. And this brilliantly illustrates the terrifying rapid chain reaction that followed. Step 1, as we said, the pilot tubes freeze solid. Step 2, because they're physically blocked, the speed data being sent to the flight computers becomes instantly corrupted, meaning different computers are suddenly receiving totally conflicting information. Step 3, faced with contradictory data it can no longer trust, the autopilot essentially throws its digital hands in the air and automatically disconnects. And step 4, the aircraft's computer system drops from its standard operating mode into what is known in Airbus terms as alternate law 2. Okay, so what is absolutely crucial to understanding this tragedy is the stark difference between these two flight modes. Normally, the A330 flies in normal law. Think of this as an invisible digital safety shield. If a pilot tries to pull the nose up way too high and risks stalling the plane, the computer physically will not let them do it. It overrides the pilot to keep the plane safely in the air. But in alternate law 2, that safety shield is completely gone. There is zero stall protection. The pilots are in completely manual control. Whatever happens next depends entirely on human decision-making. And unfortunately, the pilot flying at that exact moment was Junior First Officer Pierre-Cedric Bonin. He was the least experienced of the 3 pilots on board, and he critically misunderstood this sudden loss of protection. So, the protective shield is gone. The autopilot is off. The speed sensors are dead. Which plunges us right into part 3, 4 minutes of terror. It is honestly staggering how quickly this all unravels. If we map out the timeline, at 1:55 a.m., Captain Marc Dubois leaves for his scheduled rest, handing control to his 2 co-pilots. At 2:10 a.m., the pitot tubes freeze and the autopilot disconnects. Alarms start blaring. By 2:11 a.m., the captain is rushing back into the cockpit to try and save the plane. And by 2:14 a.m., the aircraft hits the ocean. The entire crisis, from the very first alarm to total destruction, unfolded in just over 4 minutes. So the critical point is what actually happened in those first few seconds after the autopilot disconnected. Because the sensors froze, the speed display on the pilot screens suddenly plummeted from 275 knots down to just 60 knots. Now, it was a completely false reading, but to the pilots, it was terrifying. In a moment of sheer panic, Junior First Officer Bonin made the fatal mistake of the night. He pulled his control stick back, hard. This violently pitched the nose of the plane up, causing it to climb rapidly from 35,000 to nearly 38,000 feet. But as any pilot will tell you, if you climb steeply without enough engine thrust, you bleed off airspeed. The plane slowed to a dangerously low level, and that triggered the one alarm every pilot fears most, a synthetic voice repeatedly shouting, "Stall, stall, stall." The confusion in that cockpit was absolute. First Officer David Roberts, sitting right next to Bonin, was completely bewildered. The cockpit voice recorder actually captured his frantic words. "What's happened? Where's the speed gone? Our speed has disappeared." Keep in mind, it's pitch black outside, lightning is flashing everywhere, alarms are screaming, and the plane itself is shaking violently. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't Robert just tell Bonin to stop pulling the nose up? Well, to answer that, we have to look at the Airbus control design. Unlike a Boeing aircraft where the control yokes are physically linked together and move in tandem, Airbus uses independent side sticks. They operate via something called dual input. This means Robert literally could not physically see or feel that Bonin had his stick pulled all the way back. So Robert is sitting there, desperately trying to figure out why the plane is stalling, completely unaware that his own co-pilot is the one physically holding the plane in that deadly stall. Because Bonin just kept pulling back, the aircraft lost all its aerodynamic lift. It essentially turned into a massive chunk of metal falling from the sky. The plane began plunging toward the ocean at a staggering, apocalyptic rate of 10,000 feet per minute. And it's right at this terrifying moment that Captain Dubois finally bursts back into the cockpit, shouting, "What the hell is going on in here?" But staring at the screens, even the highly experienced captain is completely stunned. The plane is in a freefall, and nobody knows why. As the ocean is just rapidly approaching 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 2,000 feet, the ground proximity warning system starts screaming, "Pull up, pull up!" The captain and first officer shouted Bonin to climb. And then, Bonin says the words that finally unravel the entire mystery for the captain. In this panicked voice, he replies, "And how much higher should I climb? I've had the stick fully back for ages." That right there is the chilling moment Captain Dubois finally realizes what has been happening for the last 3 minutes. Bonin had been pitching the plane up the entire time. Dubois screams for them to push the nose down to break the stall, but it is far, far too late. At 2:14 a.m. and 28 seconds, the recording cuts out. The aircraft slammed into the surface of the Atlantic Ocean with immense, brutal force, shattering instantly. 228 people. That's the number of lives that were extinguished in a fraction of a second. Entire families shattered, futures totally erased. It's an incredibly heavy number, and honestly, it's the exact reason investigators refuse to give up on finding the truth. After a tragic loss of that magnitude, the world demanded answers. This brings us to our final section, accountability and lasting reforms. You know, it took nearly 2 agonizing years and a robotic submarine searching at depths of 3,900 meters to finally locate the wreckage and the black boxes. And when France's Aviation Authority, the BEA, released their findings, they revealed a truly tragic mix of corporate negligence and massive training gaps. First off, those thawless pitot tubes, they had a known history of icing up. Airbus had actually recommended swapping them for more reliable ones, but Air France delayed the replacement just to save time and money. On top of that, the airline heavily over-relied on automation. They simply hadn't provided their pilots with proper simulator training for a sudden autopilot disconnect at high altitude. Nor did they train them on how to recover from a stall if airspeed indicators failed. They basically just assumed the computers would never fail. And this led to a grueling, agonizing legal battle for the victims' families that stretched over 17 long years. In April 2023, the world was stunned when a court initially acquitted both Airbus and Air France. The families were, understandably, devastated, but prosecutors appealed the decision. And finally, around the 17th anniversary of the crash, in May 2026, the Paris Court of Appeal delivered a historic ruling. They overturned that previous decision and found both Airbus and Air France guilty of corporate manslaughter. The court imposed a fine of roughly $260,000 on the two massive companies. Now, for the families, this number was incredibly frustrating. They openly criticized it as being purely symbolic, pointing out that $260,000 amounts to mere minutes of profit for these global aviation giants. However, in the strict eyes of the law, and definitely in terms of corporate reputation, it was a hard-fought and truly historic victory, holding them accountable. But look, the true legacy of Flight 447 is the permanent change it brought to aviation safety worldwide. Because of the blood shed that night, the industry enacted sweeping, non-negotiable reforms. Ice-resistant pitot tubes were aggressively installed across fleets globally. High-altitude upset and stall recovery training? That became absolutely mandatory for pilots everywhere. And the fundamental guidelines for exactly how pilots must transition from automated flight back to manual flying during a system failure were completely rewritten. The story of Air France Flight 447 is a stark, tragic reminder that in aviation, a single faulty sensor combined with human panic can literally result in a catastrophe. As we continue to build aircraft that practically fly themselves, it leaves us with this really critical, lingering question. When automation inevitably fails in our most advanced, highly engineered machines, are we as humans truly prepared to take back control? It's definitely something to think about the next time you're looking out the window at 35,000 feet. Thank you so much for joining me for this